When I was young, you'd never thought about really going to film school as such, because there was only two film schools then, I think, NYU and USC, and because for most people, you learn to make films like you learn to use your Lionel trains. You didn't go to college to learn how to set up your train set. You just learned from friends, right? You taught each other. So that's how filmmaking was for me. I made a film when I was 10 with another friend, and we just, I don't know, we just did, you know, we read the the Kodak pamphlets, how to do this, how to, you know. When I was 18, I was at school and I saw someone a few years older than me shooting with a Bolex. They were shooting an industrial on the campus. And you know, it was so magic. So I stopped going to classes and just started to take tutorials in 16mm filmmaking from him. And then I left school, and at that time you could very easily just get a job in the industry. I was working already when I was 22, you know, shooting films for people. My real love was a kind of cinema I had come upon at that same age when I was around 18 or 19 in New York, which is the experimental film scene, which is very, very fertile in the early, you know, in the early 1960s. Looks like a scene for a football game in black and white.
First met Nathaniel through my need to find a documentary film editor. And the Bay Area has lots of connection to documentary filmmaking, and therefore lots of editors. And chief among the things that that made him sound different in hearing about him was the fact that he was devoting so much of his non-documentary editing life to making his own films, which were, aside from beautiful and poetic and magical, silent.
I shoot my films at 18 frames a second, which is also known as silent speed. And the reason film actually goes at 24 frames a second initially was to get the fidelity of the optical track. But since I make silent films, I'm not concerned with an optical track. I'm not the reproduction of audio. So at 18 frames, which is what most films were shot in maybe during the 1920s, there's the intermittence, the illusion of film, which is the progression of stills, and your eye covers the black between each still with an after image. It retains the image for a 50th of a second. So it gives the illusion of solidity. When you slow that down, you get closer to the threshold where the intermittence is about to fall apart. And there's something more vulnerable and poetic about that, and delicate. Another thing is, because usually when I work on my films or show films, except in an auditorium kind of screening, the projector's in the room. And the projector sounds so much nicer at 18 frames per second. I try to arrange images, the progression of images. In other words, you have an image, then you have a cut, and then you have an image and a cut. The cut, in a sense, refreshes the view of the image. The cut refreshes the image. So my films are about shots and cuts, this very primordial aspect of cinema. There's an image and there's a cut to the other image. Those are the two elements. It's like yin and yang, image, cut, image, cut. So those are the two things. So in my filmmaking, I try to take an image which in a way is not like an image of the world, but it is a world. I try to make the screen itself into a world that has, that somehow heals the psyche. There's something about the shape and the color and the light, and then the cut moves the psyche, adjusts it slightly, so then in a way the cut doesn't allow your mind to make a conceptual or verbal connection. It's a visual connection, and that visual connection just jolts you in a certain way, which has poignancy, which opens up things in your psyche. So I've worked all my life to try to find a way to make cinema itself into a poetic medium. I go through the same process, but one thing that's fun is you work on a film becomes your whole world. You know, if a cut isn't quite right, you wake up in the middle of the night thinking, why isn't that working? Or, you know, it becomes this whole world, and then you finally get it to work, and it's all working. There's nothing that bothers you about it and wrong. And then it's done, And maybe it's like, like I don't have children, but maybe it's like when your kids go off to college, all of a sudden they don't need you anymore. And it's like the film doesn't need you anymore, it's done. And at that point, I sort of turn on it. It went from this thing which was absorbed my whole, it meant everything to me, to suddenly be nothing, it means nothing. I go, what dream was I in? Then you see it a year later, and all of a sudden you see it again. Or you go and see it like out of my apartment, and you see it in a venue, like at the PFA. I hadn't seen The Dreamer outside of my apartment until we saw it on the PFA screen. Then you see it on a big screen with a silent projection booth, and sometimes you re-see it. I get surprised by the films I thought were stinkers. Sometimes I see 5 years later and realize that was actually a really good one. So I don't trust myself.